Go ahead, put it on real tight. Hope you brought your best tonight. They say they got the fireworks, yeah, they say they got the show. Here around the chutes, you're the best, so let's go.
This is Texas Toast. I'm your host, Miss Helen. Kick back and enjoy as we toast the best from Texas.
Hello and welcome to Texas Toast. I'm Miss Helen along with a special guest. This is a special episode. Of course, we like to dig in and help out everyone in the music industry. So we call this Bottoms Up, where we dig into some really important information in the music industry to help musicians, fans as well. Want to welcome Joe Kelly with CDX Nashville. Hello, Joe. Good to see you again.
Miss Helen. How are you?
I'm doing better now that I get to see you again. Of course, I spent some time in Nashville, last month? We were just together at the Texas Country Music Awards. And Joe, I want to start off first by talking about, maybe give everybody a little bit of the history of CDX Nashville.
Okay. So CDX Nashville is a 32-year-old company here in the service industry. We're a service-based business of the music community. So we started and put out our first singles in March of 1991. And we predominantly at that time were a service of only the major record companies. There were 32 major label imprints operating on Music Row at that time. And so we were 95% major labels and 5% independent artists. And quite frankly, the major labels didn't want the independent artists to be a part of our service. They told us, that independent recording was subpar and that including them changed the complexion of our service. And so we had to comply at that time. And today our business is 30% major labels and 70% independents.
Yes,
so we see who won in the end.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so one of the major services, talking about being service-based, I think one of the most important services we're going to talk about, and I know we have a lot of musicians that listen to our podcast, is your music delivery service to radio.
That's our core business. That's how we started. And so we deliver new singles out to radio stations on behalf of artists, labels, and managers, or anyone who needs to get a new song out to country radio. And not only country, we're all formats at this point. But it's interesting to note that we even have put out songs before, like I got a call from Big Loud when they were just a publishing company. They didn't have a label. And they said, we've got a single here that we think can be successful. Will you send it out for us, even though we're only the publisher? And I said, of course. And so we did, and it was Florida Georgia Line Cruise. And that went on to become the most successful airplay single of all time for a time. I believe it's been surpassed since then, but in the very beginning of their career, that was a smash. And we put it out for the publisher.
And what advice do you have as far as, when say a new musician's going to release his or her first radio single and they go online, they need to be prepared for graphics and different requirements in order to upload that single for radio distribution?
There are some assets that are necessary, and part of that is some single artwork. It doesn't have to be necessarily finished single artwork. It can be a publicity photo of the artist. I'm a big proponent in building name face recognition with a new artist immediately. Mm-hmm. So while you might have a piece of single art or a picture that is a lovely landscape, that doesn't do anything to build name face recognition for the artist. So I like to see either a publicity photo of the artist or some finished single artwork that includes the artist's name along with the artist's picture. In addition to that, we require a WAV file. We have put out singles before with only an MP3, but I like to give radio stations the option of having a WAV file or a 256K bitrate MP3 for them, a broadcast quality MP3 for them to choose from. And so other than that, you have to know what your label copy is. You got to know who the artist is, who wrote it, the total running time, the publisher, the performing rights organization for that publisher. You got to write a promotional paragraph. That's 8 to 12 sentences that at the end of those 8 to 12 sentences, A programmer might have read those 8 to 12 sentences, and at the end, their conclusion should be, well, now I want to go hear that.
Right. And so they go in the programmer's preview, and then hopefully at that point they download and put it into programming.
That's exactly right.
And then from there, let's talk about the charts and traction and how that works.
Sure. So we were very innovative in the beginning of CDX. There were, like I said, 32 major label imprints, and they were not servicing every country radio station in America. They were only servicing the top 100 markets. So New York, LA, Chicago got record service. 2,400 other towns did not. So the founders of this company, Paul and Charlie, who were my greatest mentors in business, hired me when I was a 22-year-old kid. And so they were very innovative in the idea for the company. And so when I took over the company and eventually bought the company from them, I wanted to continue the innovation. I felt like innovation has always been in the company. In fact, a funny story, when Paul, the remaining founder, handed me the keys to the company, we were in an office building at the time, and we were on the second floor, and he was going down on the elevator, and as he was saying goodbye to me after he turned the business over to me, the doors were closing, and he said, "You're going to need to modernize it."
Oh.
And then he went down on the elevator. And so I didn't know what that meant, at the time, but quickly learned that there was a need out there for having the ability to track radio airplay. We do and have always done a wonderful job of delivering it everywhere it needs to go through the delivery side. But beyond that, we've always told our customers, or we previously had told our customers, we do not promote records. We do not track your airplay. Those are functions of the label. The label typically have a building full of people who do those things. And so when Paul told me you're going to need to modernize it, I was sitting in my recliner one night and I was thinking, how am I going to do that? And I started thinking about what we've always told our customers. We don't promote, we don't track airplay. And I said, let me turn that on its ear. Let me turn that completely upside down. And let me say, we can promote your record and we can track your airplay. What would that look like? And so in the tracking portion of it, I knew there was going to have to be software developed. And so I developed a software system and eventually was successful in getting a provisional patent and then a full patent on the technology of monitoring terrestrial radio, meaning AM and FM radio, through the online web stream of their broadcast signal. They all put their broadcast signal on their website under a listen here, listen live, listen now type button. Streaming is the future at radio, and they know that. All of their sales growth is in their digital properties. So content is king. And the easiest content they have to put on their website or their digital properties is their broadcast signal. They're already paying to create it.
Right.
And so they all started putting it on there. And so I decided that I would build one computer system that was big enough to listen to thousands of radio stations simultaneously and recognize every song played on every radio station, logging all of that airplay data into a big database, and then build a user interface for people to subscribe to and log in, where they can look at their airplay, see where they're getting played across the country, not only what station, but what station and what time of day, morning drive, middays, afternoon drive, evenings, overnights. Those are called day parts, and we put that information on there. We put the cumulative spin total on there so artists and labels and managers and agents can track and see when they get north of 150 cumulative spins in a market. Because as soon as you get north of 150 cumulative spins in a market, you have familiarity there, which means you can go tour into that market and people are familiar with you and they will come to hear you. Which is ultimately why we're all in this business these days anyway, because all of the revenue streams in the music business have become surrounded by touring and merch. The recorded music is merely a business card that we hand out to hopefully energize all the other revenue streams surrounding an artist's career. So touring and merch is very, very important. Traction, this monitoring system, gives you the ability to geo-target Facebook, Google, fan acquisition, tour dates, It's real actionable data that you can use to monetize an artist's career.
It just blows my mind just listening to you talk. I mean, you're just so full of information, and it's just so inspiring, and it's just so helpful to our musicians. Let's talk about it from a radio standpoint. Let's say there's a radio station and they're not on the panel yet, like say for the CD extraction, for our Texas reporters, because we're going to talk about the multiple charts that you have. We'll kind of segue into that. But let's say there's a radio station that's like, hey, I need to get on this panel. I want to be a part of being able, they don't know I'm here. They don't know that I'm spinning this stuff because I'm not on the panel. So how does a radio station go about doing that?
Sure. So there is a place on our website at cdxcd.com where they can go and apply. And so what we will do at that point is we will go in and we will get their stream and we will add it into the Traction system, and we'll have our system start listening to their radio station and tracking their airplay. One of the nice things about the system is that we don't take opinion or conjecture or anything. We look at raw data. And so I've had a station in Texas that has asked for a couple of years to be on the mainstream country reporting panel. And I have in turn looked at their data every 6 months or so, and they're very, very heavily weighted in Texas country. And my answer back to that programmer is, I'm fine having you on the Texas chart panel, but I don't think you're a good fit for the mainstream country panel because you're not playing enough mainstream country music. And so now that station has moved it to more of a balanced situation between Texas country and mainstream country. And so now we'll add them to the mainstream panel as well, so they can be both. But my point there is we were looking at the raw data, and we're able to look at what we're actually doing instead of somebody telling us what they think they're doing.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the different charts that you have there at CDX.
It's easiest if I do it in a chronological order for me. Naturally, we've been around the longest in mainstream country. So that's where we launched. We launched first in mainstream country. And from that, we started going into the more sister-related formats to mainstream country. So we launched the second chart in Texas country. Very much a brotherhood between mainstream country and Texas country, I like to say. And I think that we're seeing us all pull together more and more all the time as an overall industry. And I think Kyle Young from the Country Music Hall of Fame said it best when he opened the Outlaws and Armadillos exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. And he said, Texas has always needed Nashville, and Nashville has always needed Texas.
Love it.
And so, that is kind of our mantra. And so we have enjoyed a wonderful relationship with our brethren in Texas. And then from there, we launched into Americana. We formed a partnership with the Americana Music Association, and Jed Hilly and Michelle Rhodes there were the tip of the spear there, and we started providing them their charts that the Americana Music Association publishes. We're now in Southern Gospel, Positive Country, so every sister-related format to Nashville. Now, I was strategic in that because in the beginning, when you're launching these things, you have to be boots on the ground where you're launching these things, and I wanted to do that in formats that it was easy for me to travel to. So in country, Texas country, Americana, Southern Gospel, all of those formats are either here or Texas. And so it wasn't like I launched in adult contemporary and I had to go to LA twice a month. I didn't want to launch in contemporary hit radio and have to go to New York twice a month. Those things are coming, and that's part of our growth plan. But they were a part of future phases rather than right. So right now we're publishing charts, like I said, in mainstream country, Texas country, Americana, positive country, and Southern gospel. And in addition, we did a chart for true indie. Now, true indie is
Yes.
defined as artists that come from labels that don't own a promotion staff of their own. So, Universal, Warner Brothers, Sony, they own their own promotion staffs. There's a 6-7 person staff for every imprint, senior VP, a VP of national, and then 4 or 5 regionals, and then a promotion coordinator. That's a couple $1 million a year commitment to salaries and travel and entertainment for those people. It was basically a chart breakout so that we didn't ask true independent artists to compete against major worldwide companies like Warner and Universal and Sony.
And I noticed something too, talking about, you just kind of did a run through on the different charts. I noticed that there'll be times like certain artists will have a radio single out and you see them charting on multiple charts, like the Southern Gospel Positive Country, CD Extraction Texas, maybe the True Indie chart. How does that happen?
Okay, so we have internally in the software broken out those stations or those charts into panels of radio stations. And those radio stations could be a part of the chart panel for multiple charts.
Okay.
So a station might play mainstream country, but they also might play a Texas country song per hour. And on Sundays, they play positive country. So that would be a radio station that was eligible for all three. And so when we ingest a song and we fingerprint a song into our system, we tell the system which charts to make that song eligible for. And so we call that a monitoring tier. So when we ingest a song and we fingerprint it, we tell it, okay, make this eligible for the mainstream country monitoring tier, the Texas country monitoring tier, and the positive country monitoring tier.
That is awesome stuff. And let's talk about, so once an artist got it out there and they start charting, there's a timeline. I know there's a lot of musicians, they'll release a single and it takes a while for it to get its traction and to gain and to get into programming and for it to start, getting marked. But, it takes a while for a single to move up the chart.
It really does. And I'll say this, and I take every opportunity to say this every time I'm interviewed, but radio is the #1 driver of new music discovery. Radio is the most important thing that we do to expose artists and new music. Everything else makes up they're all fingers that make up the whole hand, but radio is the most important, that opposable thumb. Touring is important, television, press and publicity, digital marketing, all the other things that we do are important, but radio is #1. Nothing moves the needle like I heard it on the radio. It gives a song and an artist credibility that nothing else does. And so therefore we want to work closely with our partners at radio. And we understand that they're doing far more with less people all the time. We understand that the charts move slower than ever. The average life of a single when country music was at its height in the 90s was 16 weeks. That meant 4 months. That meant you could put out 3 George Strait singles in a year. Now the average life of a single is approaching 50 weeks. We have seen singles that last into the high 60-week range to go #1. That means you're working a single at radio for a year. That's never been before. So it makes perfect sense that it takes longer to get a song started at radio because they last so much longer. So we're seeing on average, in order to chart something in the mainstream chart, we're seeing pre-promotion and working that song for 8 to 12 weeks before it'll debut in the top 80. And so there's an awful lot of setup that goes into it. And we have to be understanding of what our partners at radio are dealing with. Now, I wish the charts moved a little faster. I don't think it's healthy to burn a single up and down a chart in 12 weeks, like we have seen happen before on some superstar acts, because that's just not long enough for an audience to truly become that familiar with an artist and a song. But we see Blake Shelton singles go #1 in 12 weeks, and that's really fast. But 16 was great. Anywhere between 16 and 20 weeks is very, very healthy. I do think they move too slow at this point, and I would like to see those numbers come down some, those weeks on.
Well, why do you think that change came about? Because there's so much music out there now because of all the independent artists.
I mean, that's a part of it. Certainly, there's a lot of contributing factors. And you got to remember that radio stations are in the advertising business. They're not in the music business. Mm-hmm. And so radio is a very research-driven business. And so they research, because they have a finite amount of time to sell, which is 30 and 60-second commercials, and there's only so many of them. The only way they can increase revenue is to charge more per spot. Well, the only way they can justify charging more per spot to an ad agency or an advertiser is by increasing their ratings. And there are independent third-party companies out there that measure those kind of things, and those numbers are very, very important. Mm-hmm. And so they look and say, okay, if we have to increase our ratings in order to charge more money, what are the things that most adversely affect our ratings? And so research proves tune out is the #1 reason, and so that's when a listener might reach for the seek or the scan button. So they researched it further and said, what's the #1 reason for tune out? The #1 reason for tune out, or for you to reach for the seek or scan button, is unfamiliarity. Mm-hmm. As soon as our ears hear something unfamiliar to us, we naturally reach for the seek or scan button. Now, if that's true, and it's also true that the average radio audience completely turns over every 11 minutes. So if the cum audience of a radio station is 25,000 people, 11 minutes from now, there's still 25,000 people listening to that radio station, but it's an entirely different 25,000 people. And if that's true, and unfamiliarity is the #1 reason for tune out, then all we got to do is repeat the same songs over and over and over again, cut our list down to about 18 records, only play the hits. Nobody's going to burn on those records because radio listening is a tertiary activity at best. We're not sitting down in front of the radio listening to the Grand Ole Opry as a family in the living room like they used to do. Right. And so we're getting in the car, we're getting out of the car, we're getting in the car, we're getting out of the car. So if that's the case, and radio needs more ears listening, more people listening longer, that's basically the need. And unfamiliarity is the #1 reason for that not to happen. Then if I was a programmer, and again, I'm not in the music business, I'm in the advertising business, I would play the Star Spangled Banner over and over again if everyone would tune into it and listen to it all day long.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to back up to when we were talking about the radio music delivery service, because when you go on to release your radio single on the website, you have different options to release to and different pricing. Like you may, okay, how do I decide? Am I going to release to mainstream? Am I going to release to Texas? So maybe kind of condense that for someone who has an experience, like trying to figure out, oh my gosh, this drop down comes up. What do I choose? And the pricing.
Sure. So if you want to do a mainstream country full service release through CDX, that's $1,400. And that's the most expensive thing you can buy from us. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is also the best value. You get included on a hard copy compilation CD that 900 radio stations have indicated back to us they still want to receive. And when we poll them and ask them, well, why? How are you using it inside the radio station where the rubber meets the road? Because if I'm paying to manufacture and mail you a CD and you're throwing it in the corner, throwing it in the trash and using the digital delivery system, then I want to know that and I want to stop sending you that CD. It's the most expensive thing I do. And so we get answers back from programmers like, I can throw it in the car and track through on the steering wheel. on my commutes to and from the radio station and keep up with the new music that way. Because I can't listen to new music in the radio station because I get interrupted constantly.
Right.
I've had programmers say, we can throw the CD in and put it on just repeat and let it play all day long in the radio station. And I see what songs I'm singing in the shower the next morning. That tells me what I ought to add to my radio station.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of reasons why. With that $1,400 mainstream country package, you get every country radio station in America, including the 150 in Texas. And so you also get it serviced 3 times digitally, 3 digital e-blasts, inclusion on the hard copy CD, and you get invited into our office to do a CDX listening party, which is a 3-song acoustic performance video shoot. So it has tremendous value for $1,400. By the way, that $1,400 is the same price we started charging in March of 1991 when we launched.
Wow.
We've never increased the price, which I'm very proud of that fact, because we've continued to add value. And back then, all that meant was you were included on the CD for $1,400. That was it. And now you get the digital delivery, you get the listening party.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so, but $1,400 is $1,400. That's a lot of money. And so we have people that say, I can't afford it, so give me some other options. Okay, well, then if you want to geo-target, a state, I'm not gonna geo-target Pennsylvania, but I will geo-target Texas, because it is the Republic of Texas. It has more venues. It has more of everything in it. And so Texas is the only state that we break out and offer an individual service to. It is the only state that has its own music industry.
Right.
So,
it's big too. It's big.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to do Texas, now there's only 150 radio stations in Texas. So it's cost prohibitive to manufacture a CD for Texas. We don't do that. It's digital only delivery in Texas, but you can do it for $150. So if you're a Texas artist that's out there gigging and working hard and trying to build something, we offer you an affordable way to get it out to the radio stations that matter. Now it's 150 stations in Texas, but it's about 1,200 emails that get the blast, because it's a lot of industry and it's a lot of multiple people at multiple stations. So we do the same thing in Americana, because Americana is basically 80 radio stations spread out all over the country that choose to play roots-based music, and which is the very definition of Americana. And so a lot of those folks needed an inexpensive option. So we do the same thing. If you want to single out to the 80 Americana stations, which is also, I think, about 1,100 recipients, then you can do that for $150 also. That's or awesome. You can do, because that's an album-driven format, you can do an album, an EP or an album. You can do an EP up to 45 minutes of music for $225, and then if it's over 45 minutes of music, an LP basically is $300.
Okay.
And so we give you options there.
Well, lots of options, lots of services at CDX Nashville, and thank you for all you do. And I had the honor and privilege of coming to see y'all and doing a visit, and you really have your heart and your soul in everything, you and Allie and the whole staff there. And it's been awesome having you finally on the podcast. Thank you so much, Joe Kelly.
Thank you so much.
I dare to say, well, you can go to hell. Hell, I'll go to Texas. I've had my fill of every place but home. Well, take away